الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I hope everyone is well. I'm joined by, mashallah, Subboor today, and we're going to be watching a very interesting clip of Alex O'Connor. We'll play the clip first, and then we'll discuss what's going on, basically.
You know, some people, especially as they get older, especially as they get closer to death, might think to themselves, well, okay, but what do I want here? That isn't happiness, aren't we often told a lot of the time by atheist moral philosophies like utilitarianism, that happiness is actually the goal here? In which case, why are we doing these debates? Why are we like going around trying to convince people? I had a debate with Subboor Ahmad, a Muslim, he's part of like the Dawa scene. And at one point in the debate, I remember him saying something like, well, if you think that like maximizing pleasure, minimizing suffering is the metric for morality, then why are you here? Why are you doing this? Even if you think it's true that there's no God, if studies show that people who believe in God are happier and more fulfilled, then don't you have a moral obligation to shut up? He didn't put it in those words. But I remember thinking afterwards about that and thinking like, yeah, that's an interesting question. Maybe there is something about the decline of new atheism that's got to do with the fact that even if people still think it's true, they think, that it's going to make people less happy somehow, and therefore they don't want to spread it anymore.
Okay, so very interesting clip, bro. I want to start off by getting your thoughts on what Alex said in this clip. He's obviously referring back to the debate you had with him a few years ago.
Overall, he's evolved in his thinking. He's adapting to the new realities of the world. And what's quite nice about this clip is that you see he's internalized. I mean, there's one thing logically understanding an argument. There's one thing psychologically internalizing it and feeling it. And he's right, because, there may be some people out there who believe in atheism, but they're like...
Summarize the main point here. What is the point he's contending?
Yeah, I mean, the point...
So, essentially the point is that, look now how silly is this claim. In its more, in its stupid form, but then it also has one more thoughtful form. Both are very stupid, but anyway. So, the claim is Islam from the scope of the Muslims. Now, listen to the claim from the scope of the Muslims. Islam brings so much joy and happiness to this world that people should essentially throw their brain to the garbage and blindly follow Islam, because otherwise how can they achieve happiness without Islam? So that is the argument from the perspective of the Muslims. From the perspective of the cosmic skeptic, it's a little bit more elegant, but almost equally stupid. So the cosmic skeptic implies that well-being equals pleasure and joy. No, it isn't, my friend.
Point that I made in the debate that he's referring to is, well, if maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain is your paradigm, then if there are studies which show that belief in God leads to happiness, then why would you not adopt that belief? And this wasn't supposed to be an argument for God. This was an argument for why.
Like a utilitarian type of argument.
But I like the way that he put it, even though he said, that's not what I said, but that's what I meant. Yeah, which is, you do have a moral obligation to keep your mouth shut then.
Yeah.
Because even if you believed it to be true, it's not doing the world any good. Now, obviously, I believe there's independent good arguments for God. This is not an argument for God. Some people understood this as an argument for God. Obviously, he knows and I know that this wasn't supposed to be. But from a purely pragmatic point of view, it makes total sense.
So, let's look at the argument. Premise 1. Atheistic morality is utilitarian, maximizing pleasure and minimizing suffering. Premise 2. Religion brings more pleasure and less suffering than atheism. Therefore, conclusion, people should blindly follow religion. That is the argument. This argument is a deductive one. Okay, if the premises are true, the conclusion follows. It's not an inductive one. In other words, the scope of the argument is it doesn't claim most probably true. It claims absolute certainty. But anyway, that's beside the point. Okay. So, if the premises are true, the conclusion necessarily follows. So, first, let's investigate if the premises are true. So, the premise 1 says, atheistic morality is utilitarian. That is not true. Religion brings more pleasure and less suffering than atheism. That is also not true. So the problem with the argument are its premises. Atheism is not a dogma, it's a response to a single proposition. Does God exist? Atheists say, I believe not. That is atheism. Atheism is not a dogma. Therefore, for someone to be an atheist, he doesn't need to follow a certain moral theory. That is the difference from religion. For example, if someone doesn't follow Islamic morality, he cannot be a Muslim. If someone doesn't like Christian morality, he cannot be a Christian. But that's not the case of atheism. Okay, there is no dogma that says that in order for you to be an atheist, you need to adopt utilitarian moral theory. No, there isn't such thing in atheism. So, atheists don't need to adopt the utilitarian moral theory to be atheists. Utilitarianism, as the claim that well-being equals maximizing pleasure and minimizing suffering, is wrong. Yes, my green screen does some weird things. Anyway. So, well-being is much more than pleasure. Socrates, the father of moral philosophy, gives a better description of well-being or how we ought to live. Let's hear him.
The Ideas of Socrates. In this lecture, we are going to examine a few of the main ideas Socrates repeated over and over in his conversations with his fellow Athenians. We will look at his exhortation to care for your soul, his conviction that knowledge of virtue is necessary to become virtuous, and in turn that virtue is necessary to attain happiness, his belief that all evil acts are committed out of ignorance and hence involuntarily, and finally his presumption that committing an injustice is far worse than suffering an injustice. Socrates believed that philosophy had a very important role to play in the lives of individuals, and in Plato's dialogue, the Gorgias, he explained why he held such a belief. For you see what our discussions are all about, and is there anything about which a man of even small intelligence would be more serious than this? What is the way we ought to live? Many people never consciously contemplate the question of how one ought to live. Instead, the course of their lives is largely determined by the cultural values and norms which they unquestionably adhere to. but according to Socrates, the examination of this question is very important, as it is through striving for answers to it that one can hope to improve their life. One of the reasons why most do not consciously contemplate this question is because it requires that one attain self-knowledge, or in other words, turn their gaze inward and analyze both their true nature and the values which guide their life, and such knowledge is perhaps the most difficult knowledge to obtain. This conviction is conveyed in perhaps Socrates' most famous statement: "The unexamined life is not worth living." Examining oneself is the most important task one can undertake, for it alone will give us the knowledge necessary to answer the question, "How should I live my life?" As Socrates explained, once we know ourselves, we may learn how to care for ourselves, but otherwise we never shall. When we turn our gaze inward in search of self-knowledge, Socrates thought we would soon discover our true nature. And contrary to the opinion of the masses, one's true self, according to Socrates, is not to be identified with what we own, with our social status, or even with our body. Instead, Socrates famously maintained that our true self is our soul. As a quick side note, it is important to mention that the ancient Greeks lived before the ascension of Christianity, and hence for them the notion of the soul did not have the same religious connotations that it has for us. What Socrates actually meant when he made the claim that our true self is our soul is not known for certain, although many scholars have taken a view similar to the one put forth by the famous historian of philosophy, Frederick Copleston, who wrote that in calling our true self our soul, Socrates was referring to the thinking and willing subject.
So that is a better attempt to explain well-being. The only part I disagree with Socrates is his vague implication that philosophy is essential for well-being, but as a hard claim. Okay, I will define well-being as actualizing our potential to become better, emphasizing to the word potential, which gives a more personalized perspective in the pursuit of well-being that departs from the hard claim of a Platonic type of absolute. Okay, the objective, in my view, the objective of good and better, what is good and better, the objectivity comes from the nature we all share, in the hard sense. So we are all humans, we have a common nature, okay? That defines the objectivity of what, depending to our physiology and the environment, what makes our life better and us better. But then also there is the second level in our human physiology, which has to do with our personal differences that are defined by our DNA, our physical predisposition. I might be better in music. So my call is music. If I become a lawyer, then I'm not in fact actualizing my potential to become better, because my potentiality is in music. So I can achieve well-being if I actualize my potential to become better according to my natural predisposition. So, okay, so here is where I disagree with, not exactly disagree, I don't take the hard position of Socrates. But in any case, the attempt of Socrates to define well-being is very good, undeniably. Is there anything an atheist cannot do from what Socrates described in this meaningful pursuit for well-being because of atheism? In other words, if he does it, that will mean he's not an atheist anymore, or that compromises the truth of atheism. Nothing, absolutely nothing. Okay. Now, the irony is something that Socrates said in his meaningful description of the pursuit of well-being, that a Muslim fundamentalist like Subboor cannot do without compromising his core beliefs in Islam? Yes, almost everything. Okay, so the Islamic view of well-being is as shallow as utilitarianism, if not even worse than utilitarianism. So, the problem is not with atheist Subboor. The problem is with you, in fact.
Pragmatic point of view, it makes total sense. And so what he's doing here in this clip is he's saying that got him to think. And I'm glad it did, because a lot of people later on in life, and after a few years when they mature, they realize, wait a minute, this isn't as clear as I thought. I need to not only take the brute facts of what's right or wrong, or what I believe to be true, but also the implications of my worldview.
The claim that a person who knows religion is not true should lie to himself and others so he can maximize pleasure is ludicrous. It's okay, even if we assume that religion brings pleasure in this world more than atheism, which is against evidence. Secular societies tend to be happier than religious societies, but let's assume that's true. Still, maximizing pleasure doesn't equal well-being. Someone might be miserable in life and still achieve well-being. And often, hardships and difficulties in life help us builds our character, and make us a better person. Even if I die in a just war, I still achieve well-being. Okay, so the first outrageous error this argument implies is that well-being equals maximizing pleasure. Outrageous claim. Certainly not atheists believe that. Okay, so now the idea that Islam maximizes pleasure is ludicrous, outrageous. If we exclude things like cancer, and I'm talking quite literally now, if we exclude things like cancer, Islam is the number one social problem of the world. It brings more misery and suffering to this world than any other thing in this world. Maybe go ask the people in Gaza how much they maximize pleasure. Islam only brings pleasure to deluded Muslim males. Other than that, what pleasure it brings? It brings wars. Its aggressive ideology brings wars. It's imperialist. So it's receptible to conflicts, sectarian conflicts, wars. 1,400 years. All its history of Islam is all wars. So unless war maximizes pleasure, that claim is not true. In other words, you idiot, just because you took one proposition that when you are in your deathbed and you are deluded and you believe you will go to some imaginary theme park, just because 5 minutes before you die you feel comfort, that doesn't mean that Islam maximizes pleasure. Just because 5 minutes before you die you feel comfort. How about all the rest of your life? Our Islamic society, Islam is against development, scientific and technological development. That does this maximizes pleasure? No, it doesn't. Islam is against skepticism. It's against freedom. It's against moral conscience. It's okay. All these things are essential to well-being, as Socrates described. Yet Islam is against all these things. Islam is in favor of blind faith. So, but let's analyze one by one these things. First of all, Islam is against freedom of expression, freedom of speech. In other words, unlike what Socrates described, you cannot achieve well-being because you can never find your true self. You cannot look inwards and find your true self when you lie to yourself with superstitious nonsense. When you are not free to think, when there is no freedom of conscience, how can you investigate your true self and therefore achieve virtue? Then, okay, so that's the one. Islam disables moral conscience. And if you disable moral conscience, you are not even a moral agent. You are not even a moral agent, let alone achieve well-being. You are just a robot. Can robots achieve well-being? No, they can't. Okay. So that's the one. The second, Islam, so we said is against freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of conscience. Then Islam is prone to wars. Islam is against technology, as we said, is against... Okay, Islam is against the products of the soul, like music. How can you achieve well-being when Islam blocks the products of the soul? For example, I am meant to become a musician. This is what makes me happy. This is what I am meant to do. This is my predisposition. My physical predisposition is to become a musician. Yet, if I was Muslim, music is haram. Therefore, it blocks my well-being. Music is haram. Okay. So, Islam insists in a sterile conformity that smashes individuality and therefore smashes the potential of each individual to become better in what in his call, in what he is meant to do, therefore is against well-being. What other things Islam goes against well-being? Islam is against moral philosophy. Philosophy is haram in Islam. You need to blindly follow commands. Is being against moral philosophy makes you a better moral person? How is that possible? No, it doesn't. Okay, so Islam in many ways is against well-being. For example, it values superstition over skepticism, over science. It values blind faith over skepticism. It values disable your moral conscience in favor of barbaric Sharia laws. Islam promotes barbarism in the hudud, in Sharia. It physically harms and tortures people. Sharia is torture. Okay, marrying children goes against well-being. Islam is misogynistic. As your friend, what was his name, Daniel Hahikatsu said, women should not be educated. Is that going in favor of well-being? Education is essential for well-being. Without education, you cannot achieve well-being. Yet, Islam says that half of human population should not be educated. Women. Okay, it oppresses women. It oppresses all kinds of minorities. It teaches stupid mythology over true wisdom. Okay, in case you are you have any delusions, the mythology in Islam, how Islam explains the natural world, is stupid mythology in the levels of the little Red Riding Hood and the 12 dwarfs. Really, is that brings well-being? To be a complete buffoon, believing stupid mythology. So if I am a person and I actually believe the little Red Riding Hood and the 12 dwarfs as truth, do I achieve wisdom and therefore well-being? No. Okay, so in all kinds of ways, and now I forgot so many other things, but anyway, you get the picture. In all kinds of ways, Islam goes against well-being. So the argument you put forward is wrong in two ways, Subboor. First, well-being doesn't equal utilitarianism, and no atheist, some atheists might claim that, but that is not the position of atheism. So that is wrong. The second wrong is that that you implied that religion maximizes pleasure. No, it doesn't, in fact. Thank you very much.